Graham, you might want to close your camera for now. Okay, welcome everyone. We're just going to wait a few minutes here to get everyone in the room. Okay, can I get a thumbs up if people can hear me and see me? I think, yeah, there is a react button at the top of your screen that you can hit, and you can do a couple of things, claps and stuff like that. So everyone has that option. Okay, and just wait one more minute. Okay, I think we'll get started here. I've got 12:03 on the clock. So I wanted to welcome everybody to our second webinar of our winter webinar series called Becoming Firewise, Prescribed Fire Strategies for Sustainable RightsofWay Management. This is the second, as I've mentioned, and we'll have a third one next month coming up. I wanted to introduce myself. My name is Tracy Etwell. I'm the restoration ecologist with the CWF team here in Ottawa. And we're using MS Teams today, so I just wanted to draw your attention to some of the functions of Teams. So you can find the chat box at the top of your screen. You can feel free to use that to introduce yourself, say where you're from. Also, if you have any technical issues, you could write those in there. We can try to help you with that. We have been brought to our attention that there could be some issues with chat functions for some people. Some organizations seem to have them blocked. Also the Q&A box there, we will use that for questions at the very end for our presenters, but you can write them in as you go so you don't forget your questions. And then if you're having problems with your audio, check your audio settings. Sometimes we find if you use a headset, you'll get better sound quality and be able to hear better. And okay, so a couple of engagement guidelines we want to go through. We want to encourage everyone to engage, to inquire and share information, to create a common understanding. So clarifying technical terms and acronyms, be empathetic, assume your good intent, be curious, listen, disagree respectfully, and share screen and airtime. So being mindful of questions and comments to be as concise as possible. So I wanted to do a little land acknowledgement here. I'm joining from Canada's capital, Ottawa, and we acknowledge that we are on the traditional and unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe Nation. If you personally don't know the land from which you are joining us, I encourage you to visit this website called nativeland.ca. It's got a really great map of all the different territories across Canada. Then, as I mentioned, the next webinar will be next month. I wanted to draw that to your attention. So we're going to have Cicely Irwin talking, and she's going to present on her research on plant pollinator networks in urban meadows. She did a lot of work with the pollinator communities of TRCA's Meadowway project. So if you're familiar with that, it should be a very informative presentation. And there will be emails coming out to register for that coming up soon. And then I'm going to introduce just briefly our speakers here. Jason, who was proposed to speak with us today, has a conflict, so he's not going to be presenting. I am going to present a couple of slides on prescribed burn just in his absence. Then we're going to have Graham Moodle from Alice Middlesex. Then we're going to have Jake from Ontario Nativescapes and Rural Lambton Network to present on not wood, fire in perspectives of their respective habitat projects. So why prescribed fire? So lots and lots of reasons why prescribed fire is used. It's used to mimic natural cycles of fire in communities, on landscapes. It's used to reduce woody plant material, shrubs and trees that start to encroach into habitats. It's used to regenerate habitat, so grasslands, prairies, savannas are very commonly used. It's used to prepare a site to seed. So if you need to get rid of a lot of grassy weeds and things on the surface, it's a great way to do that. It also controls a lot of weed infestations. So some of the weeds can't handle being burned. Some of our native plants are well tolerated to that kind of fire exposure. Also can stimulate the seed bank. So some sites might have seeds from historical prairies that fire germinates those seeds and encourages them to grow. Reduces the fuel load. So from a perspective from wildfire risk, it reduces the load of vegetation that can then burn, and so reduces the risk of precious resources being burnt, like houses and power lines and things like that. And then by no means am I an Indigenous expert, but I wanted to highlight that there's a lot of Indigenous uses for prescribed fire over history, over millennia. So they often used fire to regrow desired plants for food, for their medicines, for baskets, for hunting grounds, and just for spiritual practices. I thought I'd highlight a couple of projects. So these are two big projects that happen in Ontario. So the Ojibwe Prairie Complex gets burnt every year. This is a long historical remnant prairie where it's really important that these prescribed burns are carried out. Also, Toronto has High Park, which is an oak savanna community. And the controlled burns here happen pretty much regular every year, basically to get rid of, again, the woodies, the invasives, regenerate that grassland community under the oaks. And the oaks are well tolerated to this. They have really thick bark and they can handle these burns as long as they're low intensity. So just give you a bit of a background and a bit of insight into some of these exercises of prescribed burns that are carried out. A lot of training, a lot of expertise is needed. So as you see the fellows in the red suits there, they're really highly trained, highly skilled individuals who have years and years of training, licenses, sign-offs of qualifications. Some of the titles include burn boss, type 1 and 2 wildland firefighting. So they're trained in ignition and also suppression. So you need to have both sides of those. You may also have what's called a fire effect monitor, someone who's monitoring the effect. How fast is it moving? How much fuel is it consuming? Is it getting into the trees? Maybe there's a certain species that you want to make sure that it doesn't burn. So you want to keep that intensity, that heat lower. You may also have communication officers. So their role would be interfacing with media, interfacing with the public, talking about what's happening, notifying radio, news, that kind of thing. And then there's the long build up to preparing a prescription, or also called the burn plan. So this is a really long process where you have to look at things like what's the soil type, what's the plants there, both the things that you want to burn as well as the things you want to protect, as I mentioned earlier. What's the fire intensity that you want to have? Do you want it to go through really quickly, really slowly? Does it need to burn deeply? Does it need to burn shallow? What would be the ideal wind direction for this fire based on where the values are that you need to protect? where you're going to have your control lines. There may be a road, there may be a paved trail somewhere that's a natural fuel break. And so you want it to burn in that direction. Things like moisture. You want to know what's the relative humidity that you would like to have, because the relative humidity will affect how fast it burns and how much is consumed. So the wetter, obviously, it's going to be slower, not going to consume as well. If you have it really dry, then it's going to burn through really quickly and really fast and could get more out of control. So finding that sweet spot. Also smoke minimization. So any of these operations are going to produce a lot of smoke, sometimes depending on the speed and again, fuels. So you're thinking about roadways and the public and how much smoke is going to be produced. Are you going to impact air travel, things like that? As I mentioned, also the control lines, where your brake lines that you're going to wet down or use other tools to stop it from spreading past that line. And also staff needed, how many people on each crew, what are their jobs, that kind of thing. And then infrastructure. So you're thinking about what are the roads, what are the homes, what are the power lines I need to be concerned about. And then you need a communications plan. Who do you need to communicate with about this? Is it the local public? Is it the local fire department? Is it the newspaper? Is it residents? And, you know, also having in that what the objectives are. You need to explain to people why this is important. And then wildlife. Is there any species at risk in this site? Is there other wildlife that would just be sensitive to this burn coming through? How are you going to manage for impacts to them? Is there a certain time of year that would be better than others? Indigenous consultation. Is there any Indigenous folks around that you need to talk to and get their input on this? And then approval. So there's a long process of getting sign off on all these documents and getting your okay, even in principle, to say, yes, you could do this. And then there's a long waiting game. So finding that perfect day of the perfect temperature, the perfect humidity, the perfect wind conditions can be very tricky. And I know some projects where burns haven't happened in years because they've never got the right window. They call it the right window for that prescription to happen. And you also have to mobilize all your people and get them there for this perfect window. So then there's talking about your prescription. There's how are you going to ignite it? You know, do you need ATVs? Is it going to be hand lit? Sometimes people are using drones these days. So there's different ways to do that. Then you need to have observers keeping an eye on things, monitoring the rate of spread, the intensity, looking for unusual things that telling you that the risk is getting higher. Things like fire whirls. And then you need to do the other part, which is the not so fun part, is the mop up and the controlling of any ignition, any embers that are still burning in the final site. So sometimes you need to have staff there for long periods of time, and it's kind of a boring job, but keeping an eye on it, making sure that's not going to flare up all of a sudden when you least expect it. And just to give you an example, a prescribed burn could be a small little one-time thing, or it could be part of a longer-term burn strategy. So here's an example from Pinery Provincial Park, where they have oak savanna, and they have all these different burn units planned out for different years. So it tells when they want to burn what components, and then they would have a burn strategy for each of those based on what time of year they want to see it, what's the intensity, is there species at risk, is there sensitive plants there they want to protect. And I'm going to show you a few little clips just to get a sense of what it's like on some of these projects when an active burn is being carried out. So this first one is a shrubland burn in Northern California on kind of a hilly site. Okay, and one more. This one is a oak forest site in Northern California again, and this is under, so they're trying to burn off the understory vegetation here to make it less possible for an intense fire to blow through. So this video, you can hear the people talking, and it gives you a sense of the scale of the operation and how the staff are communicating with each other all the time. There's like an ignition crew and a mop-up crew, and they both have different jobs, and they're all communicating up the structure of the hierarchy. Okay. And then just a general comment, if you're interested in prescribed burns, would like to learn more about this application to land, there is a great online course that you can participate in, and you can find that on the grasslandfire.ca website. If you would like to get even more detailed, there is going to be a TREX, which is a training opportunity that's held in Canada and the US, and it's an on-the-ground burning operation. Lots of training, lots of education. So there's one happening in Manitoba this year in May, and then there's a rumor of another one happening in October. I'm not sure of the location of that one, but if you have any questions, you can contact Megan or Dinyar at the emails below. And then I'm going to ask Graham to come up and pull up his camera. We'll load up his presentation. So Graham is in his role as an ALICE project coordinator, serves the primary point of contact for participants, offering technical expertise and guidance to ensure the success of ongoing and past projects. Graham has years of professional experience, including, oops, including work with the St. Clair Conservation Authority and in the Logistics and Communications Department with the Royal Canadian Navy. Graham, can you share your screen? Oh no, I'm going to pull up your screen. Hold on. Okay. Okay, take it away, Graham.
Perfect. There we go. Thanks for that introduction, Tracy. Again, yeah, I'm Graham Model. I'm the ALICE project coordinator for Middlesex County, coming up on 2 years now. Looking forward to talking to you guys a bit about ALICE, a bit about what we do, and then a bit of a look at one of our specific projects that we have planned for this year. So if we could just hop to the next slide there, Tracy. So what is ALICE? For those that haven't heard of us yet, simply put, ALICE is an environmental nonprofit that helps farmers to plan, fund, establish, and maintain natural restoration projects and produce ecosystem services on marginal farmland. So what this means is we help to secure funding, provide establishment and maintenance costs to get these projects into the ground, as well as help with the project management, offering technical guidance and support to the landowner. Next slide, please. There we go. ALICE has a few specific principles that kind of help us govern our program. I'd like to talk about a few of them briefly here. The first one is that ALICE is community developed. So ALICE is run at the community level across the country, which gives each county a lot of autonomy and independence to tailor the ALICE program specifically to their county and the agricultural and environmental priorities that they have. So for ALICE, we look to fight climate change and loss of biodiversity across the country. But here in Middlesex, our priorities are prioritizing the water quality of the Great Lakes, and also of our main waterways, the Thames River, the Sydenham River, the AuSable and Little AuSable River. Another key principle is that ALICE is farmer delivered. So ALICE is a program for farmers by farmers. Each community is governed by a partnership advisory committee, what we call a PAC. Now, each PAC is made up of local farmers from the area, so from Middlesex County, and it's these farmers who vote and ultimately approve or deny projects for the county program. It's the PAC that really decides the overall direction of the program, as well as voting on each individual project for approval. ALICE is also targeted, so we specifically look for the marginal land, and we look to put nature on it. The unproductive wet areas, sides of ditches, edges of woodlots, places like that. ALICE is not a program for the wholesale retirement of farmland. We look for the low-lying lands, the eroding slopes, the unprofitable areas. So these areas that aren't really producing well to produce traditional row crops, and they're not really being productive for the farmer. So we want to make every part of a farm productive, whether it be with corn and soybeans, or whether it's producing cleaner air and cleaner water or habitat for wildlife. Next slide, please. So these are just a few examples of the shape that ALICE projects can take. Now, again, the great thing about ALICE is that the power really resides with the PAC, that is the Committee of Local Farmers. So if a project aligns with our principles and fits our program, it gets voted upon and approved, then we can move ahead with it. What this does is it doesn't restrict us to any specific or certain type of project. It lets us implement a wide variety of projects like bank restorations, pollinator buffer strips, restored wetlands, native tallgrass prairies, tree planting, livestock exclusion fencing, modified ag programs, as well as various other erosion control methods. So we don't really have one cookie cutter approach or type of project, but rather we treat each project, each farmer, each parcel of land on an individual basis. We work with that farmer to design and develop a plan that works with him and his farming operation, and then bringing it before the PAC. So we're really looking for the areas, the sides of ditches where agriculture and nature can really meet and work in harmony together. Next slide, please. So once these projects are approved and we get them put in the ground, then these projects start to produce ecosystem services. So these are things like the cleaner air, cleaner water, increased habitat for wildlife, all those sorts of things, increased biodiversity, pretty much the benefits that you can reap from just having these projects on your farmland. And in recognition of the market value of these services being produced, ALICE pays their participants an annual payment of $150 per acre of farmland that is retired and put back into nature. So the annual payment is really integral to the ALICE program and also unique to ALICE. So it helps the farmer maintain profitability on their farm, as well as ensures their continued maintenance of the project. So it's a really important part. And also we're asking, sometimes we ask farmers to sort of internalize these costs of putting nature on their farm, right? Whenever you retire farmland and you put in trees instead, you obviously can't farm that farmland anymore. So they're losing out on profit and they're losing out on their business model there. So we want to help maintain that profitability and have nature and agriculture work together on the same property. Next slide, please. Perfect. This brings us to tallgrass prairies. Now, grasslands are a really large component of the ALICE program, with tallgrass prairies being one of our most common projects. So these native warm season grasses, native warm season prairies, they used to be found all over southwestern Ontario, but unfortunately, open grasslands were also some of the easiest areas to clear for modern agriculture, and therefore were kind of quickly converted into farmland or developed for other uses. Simply put, plowing and clearing a grassland is a lot easier than clearing a forest, chopping down all those trees, tearing out stumps. So unfortunately, a lot of these grasslands, it's kind of an endangered, near extirpated ecosystem here in southwestern Ontario now because they're just not nearly as prevalent as they once were. Next slide, please. So a bit about the warm season grasses. These warm season grasses, the tall grasses, they're kind of the backbone of Ontario tallgrass prairie, and they're truly, honestly, incredible species. So these are things like big and little blue stem, switchgrass. These grasses can grow upwards of 7 feet tall, so they're very aptly named with tall grass. They also have really extensive root systems that can reach more than 20 feet into the ground, so they really help to improve the soil matrix, slow erosion, recycle nutrients, sequester carbon, filter water, prevent nutrient runoff. They also provide really excellent habitat for wildlife. Now, all sorts of animals enjoy these worms, these tall grass prairies. So things like it provides bedding area for deer as well as a food source. Tons of shelter for small mammals, things like bunnies, rodents as well. So it provides some nice cover, some nice screen, a bit of shelter from the elements, but the prairies are still nice and open. They don't have these woody stems in them so much, so it's nice and navigable, very easy to for animals to make their way through. So all sorts of animals enjoy it, especially specifically, there's a few species at risk, mostly at risk because they're grasslands. Their native habitat here just aren't around so much. So these two species are the bobolink and eastern meadowlark, which unfortunately are also endangered now. So next slide, please. Perfect. So here's a picture of a prescribed burn we actually conducted on one of an Alice Millsac's project, Tallgrass Prairie, just last year. So this burn was just to consume the old growth there and kind of rejuvenate and reseed this prairie with just from the already existing tall grasses in it. Now, prescribed burns have actually been occurring historically for long before modern agriculture was even in the area, with indigenous peoples regularly managing and maintaining these ecosystems. One of the key features of burning is to help prevent encroachment from woody stems. So so pretty much any tree, small shrubs that like to pop up, things like that. So trees and prairies are kind of in essence competing ecosystems. So a natural succession would see a prairie eventually being outcompeted and replaced by a forest with time. So these warm season grasses, they really love full sun. So eventually, once these trees get a bit larger and start spreading out their canopy, they'll eventually outshade the prairie and replace it. Next slide, please. I want to highlight one of our projects here, planned project specifically, just located here in Middlesex County, just outside of Glencoe. The area we're looking at here is just a retired cattle pasture. So this was landowner expressed interest in putting a restoration project in this area here. So originally we had our eyes on this long wet area here, and we were looking at wetland restoration aspect of the project. But we also wanted to improve the upland habitat as well. So pretty much everything north of that wet area there is something we really want to do something more with. Now, as many as you know, simply letting a field go fallow can sometimes be an important step in the improvement of a site. So just taking that land out of production and letting it go fallow can sometimes have some big rewards. But we took a look at this field and we still thought we could do better. The fallow area, it's definitely not detrimental. In fact, it had a lot of native desirable species, so a lot of native goldenrod, some evening primrose, some species like that. So it's not like this area was worthless, but we'd still like to do something more with it. So how can we improve and rejuvenate this grassland without causing too much disturbance? How can we successfully improve and increase biodiversity without negatively affecting the prairie in the process? So naturally, we turn to burning it. Next slide, please, Tracy. So this picture is shortly after the wetland restoration work had been completed. So we took that wet area there, kind of expanded and improved upon it, holding that water there, ponding it out, and then slowly releasing it back into the back. So then slowly releasing it again. So this helps to slow the water, makes it less erodible, as well as providing a lot of habitat for migratory birds, pollinators, pretty much anything that needs a water source. Now, the reasoning behind prescribed burn would be twofold. The first is that it would serve as land prep for this area. So this marginal area of the field, it's kind of already divided by this wet area. It's not really easily accessible by machinery. So a prescribed burn of the grassland will hopefully remove the above ground growth of plants, take care of anything any standing vegetation, as well as consume the thatch that covers the ground. Now the thatch is what we call the sort of buildup of old vegetation and grasses on the surface of the ground. So once the fire comes through and consumes that, it should hopefully provide a nice bed for seeding and allow more sunlight through. So once we have this burned and the land is prepped, we have Ontario Nativescapes and Jake Lozon, who will be speaking after me here. But we're planning to get in there with him and reseed the area with the warm season grasses like the big and little blue stem and switchgrass, and then also chock it full of forbs like Virginia mountain mint, tall sunflower, milkweed. So forbs kind of basically mean wildflowers, essentially. So these are really great for pollinators, especially things like common milkweed, is specifically the only host plant for the monarch butterfly caterpillars. So we're really wanting to increase the biodiversity of this site and just kind of put in a lot more native desirable species there and just a bit more diverse. Now, the second reason behind a prescribed burn would be that it also causes a lot less soil disturbance than working the ground, which means less disturbance to the seed bank as well, which could include a lot of annual weeds and undesirable invasive species. So normally, when you're looking to convert a grassland or anything to another grassland to prepare it for seeding for a tall grass prairie, you really want a good seed to soil contact. So you want a good soil bed into which to seed. So normally that would require spraying the area and killing everything on top, and then also working the ground. So going over with a rototiller or working the ground and working all that vegetative matter into the ground and kind of preparing a nice soil bed. So hopefully with the prescribed burn, we can avoid all that. And the less we can disturb the prairie, the better, because we're just hoping to increase the native biodiversity without harming it, while still also eliminating the undesirables. Next slide, please. I think this one's a video as well, so I hope it shows for everyone well. But furthermore, again, that grasslands in Ontario have historically had such a long relationship with fire, and actually a beneficial one. So the growing points of many prairie grasses, flowers, and forbs, like species of goldenrod, their growing points are actually found below the surface of the ground. So during a fast-moving fire, the soil surface can reach 680 degrees Celsius, which is incredibly hot. But only 1 centimeter below the surface, no temperature changes at all are detected. So these native species hold their energy in their root systems, which are nicely insulated and protected underground from the heat and the flame. So these native species, the ones that are found in these tallgrass prairies, they have historically adapted to fire over hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. So they're adapted and can tolerate the burning. However, the thing is, the fire, it does a really good job of killing plants that are not specifically adapted to tolerate burning, which, fortunately, includes a lot of our undesirable species found at the site. Next slide, please. Perfect. So this is a picture this is a picture taken right after a prescribed burn was carried out. So as you can see here, it does a really good job of clearing all that above ground vegetation. And you can see there just that nice layer of ash. If you were to go out and to touch it or step your foot in it, it would just crumble away right away. And it provides some nice nutrients for the new seeds that we'll be putting in. And yeah, it also gets rid of that thatch, all that standing plant material. So sunlight and wind can warm and dry the soil surface more readily. The black ash also absorbs the sun's energy during the day, helps to insulate against the soil against heat loss at night. And then the warm soil can even speed the development of our native species root systems. While their above ground growth will have lots of sunlight now because there's no competition for it. What the fire also will do is that it takes out all these woody stems as well, so it prevents encroachment from trees that would come in and eventually replace this prairie. Next slide, please. So just to recap, this is a planned project for this year. It's actually, we're hoping to go ahead with it in March, actually, so just hopefully in the next few weeks. So it's a really exciting project. Ideally, our overall objectives for it, a prescribed burn will hopefully succeed in eliminating some of the undesirable species, so those annual agricultural weeds. Will prepare the land for seeding, and all without negatively impacting the native growth already on the present site. So it had a lot of goldenrod and had some native species in there, and we didn't want to get rid of those. We just wanted to improve upon it as much as we could and increase the biodiversity. So this is a bit of a pilot project for Alice. So we have conducted prescribed burns in the past, but these have always been on established tall grass prairies. So we haven't really used the burn as a sort of a termination to terminate a crop and then convert it into a tall grass prairie, a native warm season prairie. So this is really exciting to see how it'll work, and we're definitely looking forward to it. Next slide, please. That brings us to the end here. If there's any questions, I believe they're being held till the end, but I'd be happy to answer them, as well as my email address is there as well. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out by email as well. Yeah.
Thanks, Graham. That was fabulous. Very great overview and showing us the site and soon to what's come. Going to come in a few weeks.
Mhm.
I'm just going to remind everybody, if you do have a question, put it in the Q&A box, and then it'll be more visible for when we get to the end, and we can address those questions to Graham and Jake. Okay, next I just want to, oh, here we go. Here we go. Okay. Next up, we have Jake Lewison, who is from Ontario Nativescapes and Ontario Rural
Tracy, sorry to interrupt. It's just showing your full screen. It was in the presentation mode, but now it's exited from presentation mode. There you go.
Okay, awesome. Okay, so Jake received his Fish and Wildlife Technology Diploma from Sir Stamford Fleming in 1995. He joined the Rural Lambton Stewardship Network in 2004 as the Assistant Coordinator for the Ministry of Natural Resources. He also fulfilled the role of St. Clair River Area of Concern Habitat Stewardship Coordinator for 11 years. He is currently the Public Stewardship Land Manager for the Ontario Nativescape and Rural Lambton Stewardship Network. He, along with his coworkers, helped manage one of the largest locally grown native prairie programs in the province. Since his start, he has been involved in coordinating prescribed burns and planting over 2,100 acres of land with native prairie along roadsides, hydro corridors, pipelines, solar farms, provincial parks, and hundreds of private-owned lands. Okay, I've asked Jake to pull up his presentation and his camera. Take it away.
Thanks, Tracy. Can you see my presentation at the moment? Or do
No.
I need to share it again?
I think you need to share it.
Oh, okay. Well, we can do that. How's that?
You're good to go now.
Yep, good. Hi, everyone. Looks like everyone, Graham and Tracy, have already gone over tallgrass prairie and the reasons why we need to do prescribed burns. So I'm not going to go over all that again. What I am going to do is talk about our program and highlight one of our very successful initiatives and a project that we've been working on for almost 20 years. So we're the Rural Lambton Stewardship Network. We started in 1994 as a pilot program for the Ministry of Natural Resources. There was 46 stewardship councils in the province, and in 2013, they all dissolved. So we became an incorporated not-for-profit in 2013, and we relocated from Chatham to Wallaceburg. One of the reasons why we started into tallgrass prairie was because of this bird, the bobwhite quail, the northern bobwhite quail. Once thriving in southern Ontario, the bobwhite quail no longer exists, only on small coveys and patches on Walpole Island. Bobwhite quail rely heavily on tallgrass prairie. With the harsh winters in the 1970s and with urban sprawl, aggressive agricultural practices, overgrazing, fire suppression, these upland game birds have pretty much disappeared. So Arlesen was on a mission to reintroduce bobwhite quail back into Lambton County. Before reintroducing these game birds, a massive tallgrass prairie undertaking needed to take place in order to have sufficient habitat. So we did just that. We got M&R permits, and we started to hand collect from prairie remnants throughout the province. From the Pinery and from Ojibwe, we hand collected from different railway corridors as well. And we took all that seed and we propagated it into plugs and grew it in local greenhouses. And we secured enough land to put the plugs into seed production. We have 110 acres of seed production and 45 native flowers and 5 native grasses. We've had this since about 2004, 2005. There's another picture of some of our monocultured grasses. Everything was grown in a monocultured setting. That way we can harvest the seed when it needs to be harvested. Each species we can harvest individually. And this is how we harvest our species of tallgrass prairie. Different methods, mechanical methods with gleaners and seed strippers. And then all that seed we take back to our warehouse in Wallaceburg, and we custom clean it on specialized seed cleaning equipment. And from there, we have different types of planting methods. These are all Truex native seed drills, no-till seed drills. I believe we have 5 or 6 of them. And then obviously there's different other methods of planting tallgrass prairie. We have broadcast equipment, hydro seeders, etc. The reasons why you'd want to use these would be for smaller sites, for side slopes that you probably wouldn't safely get a tractor and a Truex drill. And then this is the big project that we're going to talk about. So this is the Highway 40 International Prairie Passage. This was modeled after Roadsides for Wildlife in the States, very successful. It is a 38-kilometer, it's a 38-kilometer native prairie passage right away that MTO owned, and it goes from Wallaceburg to Sarnia. It was purchased in the 70s by MTO, and it was actually purchased, the excess land was purchased to one day have a 4-lane. It's still 2 lanes, so we were fortunate enough to naturalize 220 acres of MTO owned right away with native grasses and native flowers. So this is what it looked like prior. It was non-productive, cool season grasses. It was mowed heavily. So one of the things that we realized at the time when we were targeting Highway 40 was that all the corridors, existing and potential natural heritage corridors in Lambton County, went east and west, while Highway 40 goes north and south. So this was pretty unique, as we were going to connect the east-west corridors with, in the southern section, there's Walpole Island, which is it's First Nations. In the center is Bickford Oakwoods, and in the north is Aamjiwnaang First Nations. So we were connecting these 3 regionally significant wildlife anchor areas with all the east-west corridors. To date, we have a little over 90 hectares of tallgrass prairie along this corridor, and 80,000 wildlife shrubs and trees that were planted by St. Clair Region Conservation Authority back in the mid-2000s. So once we had everything established, we had an issue. We had to conduct a prescribed burn in the near future. So we got a nice tour together with the regional director of M&R and the regional director of MTO, because at the time we were all M&R staff. We worked at Chatham, so we had to go with the M&R protocol for prescribed burns. So after the meeting and after the tour, it was agreed upon that we could conduct our first prescribed burn in 2006. So after several meetings, conference calls and what have you at the time, we had to come up with a plan as to what are we going to do with all the traffic on the 38-kilometer road. Well, we had to detour it all if we're going to conduct all these prescribed burns. Each concession we had labeled A through R, I believe, and so those are burn blocks, and we wanted to focus on all these different burn blocks within a small time frame of 11 o'clock in the morning till 2:30. The reason for that was because of the bus schedule. The bus schedule ended around 9 in the morning, and then by the time we got everybody gathered and everything set out, it would have been about 11 in the morning. This is what was sent out 30 days before the prescribed burn was to occur, and it was sent out to MTO, to Chemical Valley, to local residents, to fire departments, and First Nations nearby. And then we also did a media release, and the media release was sent to local radio stations and local newspapers. We did this in 2006, we did this in 2007, we did this in 2008, and we did this in 2010. And then about a week before the burn, with all the indices in place and all the weather conditions and the approved burn plans and regional directors signing off and everything, the burn was to occur in about 5 days. So that burn notice went to the same people as it did with a 30-day burn notice. Now, before we had to do all this, we obviously had to put in burn breaks, fire breaks. So we have different types of equipment for fire breaks. As you can see, it's extremely important to have fire breaks on almost all your burns, so that way no fire escapes, the burn area. Especially if the best fire breaks are exposed soil and water suppression. So as you can imagine, it took a tremendous amount of volunteers and staff. We had M&R staff, we had OPP, we had MTO, we had local residents. Roughly, we even had First Nations from Wapo Island show up with their water truck and their fire department. We had approximately 40 to 50 volunteers at each burn. And then, of course, every burn you need a burn boss. So we had a burn boss, and this was Jack Chapman at the time, giving his final briefing and a safety protocol before ignition was to occur. And then away we go. So shortly after 9 a.m., when the buses had completed their school routes, the road was closed, and RLSN, as well as volunteers, went to work. All personnel present on the burn also had their SP100 training and had updated first aid training. Controlled burn signs were placed at the north and south end of 40 Highway. All water packs were filled with water. All fire extinguishers were full. Drip torches were filled on site. Radios were on channel 4 to make sure everyone was in constant contact with one another. Once everything was in check, groups of 6 went to their designated burn blocks. 3 ignition staff and 3 suppression staff responsible for 3 blocks at a time. And there's obviously different ways to ignite a fire. As you can see, it's a mobile ignition, and then just a drip torch on the right. The majority of Highway 40 was done with walking with a drip torch at the time, and because M&R protocol didn't allow for mobile ignition until later on. And then there's the smoke impact. So Obviously, you want all your weather conditions to be favorable for that day. You could, and it can happen, have unstable weather conditions where the wind could change for a quick couple seconds, as maybe perhaps in this picture, and block out the road, but we had the road already detoured, so it didn't impact anybody. We had all kinds of fire suppression equipment that Arlison owns. We have water packs, we have Argo units, we have a Ranger suppression unit, and then I actually slipped that in there. That's the Walco Island First Nation with their water truck. All the clothing. Rural Lambton Stewardship Network. So this was after our first burn. Graham had a great photo as well of a burn after. So we'd say this would be about 98% coverage. And that's typically what you'd like. This was just last summer. All the reasons why you burn have already been discussed, and this pretty much sums it up. One of the reasons why we try to burn Highway 40 as much as we can is because of invasive woody species such as the Russian olive and red cedars. And yeah, so this photo was taken in Niagara Parks Commission in Niagara Falls. We burned a couple sites down there a couple years back, and we're just building capacity with other organizations. After we help them, they have carried on with their own burns. And that's it.
Great, thanks, Jake. That was a fabulous review of the project and all the steps and all the operations that went into it. My question off the top is, what would your advice be to people who are Rights-of-Way managers that are interested in doing a prescribed burn on their site? Like, what kinds of things do they need to think about? What would be the best criteria for a burn, do you think?
Yep. I would say obviously hiring an expert fire boss, and then start early. You know, don't think it's going to happen tomorrow, and maybe join webinars like this to get a little background as to what other organizations have gone through. One thing I didn't say in my presentation, so the last burn was in 2010, and we wanted to do another one in 2012, but we had to have written confirmation from the OPP, emergency services and municipalities, with an agreement with the approved burn plan and safety road plan. So what the OPP wanted us to do in 2012 was to put up traffic barrels at every concession. So the traffic barrels, I think there's 18 concessions. 18 times 8 is whatever, 144. So we had to put up 144 barrels at every concession. This had to be done from 9 till 11 in the morning, or whenever the burn was to occur. So, and we also had to pay for all of that. Nobody was going to help us cover those costs. So that fire in 2012 was canceled because of costs and logistics. So we learned a little bit there. And we had lots of meetings. That's another thing, is you got to have lots of meetings with everybody around. You have to notify everybody around. We've done prescribed burns in our area in the last 5 years, and you know, if people see a smoke column, they still contact the local fire department, you know, and which is fine, but get in touch with your local fire department, get to know them, get to be friends with them. You know, you don't want to be on the wrong side of them because they can shut everything down instantly. Not that they would, but I'm just saying it's good to be partners with everybody.
Great, thanks for that. I'm going to call Victoria up to field some Q&As, and if Graham wants to pull his camera up too, that'd be great. You're muted, Victoria.
Thank you for letting me know. I've done this so many times, and of course I still forget to unmute myself. So this question is for Graham. Where does the money come from for the annual subsidy for retiring farmland that you're mentioning at the beginning of your presentation?
Okay. Yeah, that's a good question. I'd just like to clarify a little bit just about our annual payment and kind of how it works and what's it for. It's not so much a subsidy for retiring farmland necessarily, maybe a bit nitpicky, but we kind of look for the marginal areas. So for example, like a low-lying area that kind of can flood seasonally. So the low-lying area, wet area that is currently being farmed, and then maybe during a wet year, a farmer would experience crop failure there, and he would be out maybe $700 an acre into that sort of area there, and just from the inputs put into it and then lost through the crop failure. So that would be the land that we'd look at, and then we'd put maybe say we'd put a wetland in there, and then it would be $150 per acre. And what that payment is kind of for is for the ecosystem services produced, but it's also to ensure the maintenance and management of that project. So things like taking care of invasives, like if you have Phragmites come in there, or in a tree project, it can help pay for the fuel of your mower to mow in between the rows. So things like that. It's not so much a subsidy, but yeah, we're not trying to compete with the profitability of farmland at all. But as for where the money comes from, it's a good question. It comes from a lot of different places, a few different places. So we have some governmental funding. So for example, 2 billion tree program, you may hear about it on the news sometimes. That is where a lot of our money for tree projects comes from. We get some money from Ministry of Environmental Conservation and Parks, some from partnering with other environmental nonprofits like CWF. So we really just source the money from wherever we can, and as much of it as we can.
And also to you, Jake, were the erosion controls adjacent to the wetland area of the site that you were working on, and were they stabilized post-burning? Were they necessary? Sorry. Were the erosion controls necessary adjacent to the wetland? Sorry, did I address this to Jake? I meant to say to Graham. Sorry.
Oh, good.
Oh, sorry. Could you repeat that, Victoria?
Yeah,
I was a little
so
distracted there.
for the wetland area on the site that you were working on, were the erosion controls necessary? Like, where was it necessary until it was stabilized post burning?
Sorry, could you repeat that once more?
Yes, were the erosion controls necessary adjacent to the wetland until the ground was stabilized post burning? So the erosion controls that you had that were next to that wetland area of the site you were working on, were they necessary post burning, or was it just that you needed them before you did the burn?
Okay, right. So we haven't actually conducted the burn yet. So the wetland project would be the erosion control measures there on the site. So just when we excavate the wetland and kind of make it a bit deeper there, we create more space to pool the water. We hold it for a little while, and what that does is it slows down the water. So most of what erosion is velocity and speed of your water. So if you take one of those away, then you help slow down the erosion. So we take away a lot of the speed from that water and then release it much more slowly, and that makes it erode a lot less in that land there. So this area here, erosion was one of the primary concerns, but we're also really hoping to increase wildlife habitat with those ponds there. So for migratory waterfowl, and then also just anything else that needs a water source, which is basically anything alive. So deer, small mammals, amphibians, pollinators, really anything. So the erosion control methods, yeah, if that answers your question well there.
And I also just have a question personally for either of you. In your opinion, in consideration of all the logistics that goes into planning the prescribed burn, what would you say would be the maximum site size that would be manageable, considering the number of volunteers that are required, the number of water trucks and things like that?
I would say 4 to 5 acres would be minimum. Once you start getting to 1 acre here and 1 acre there, it becomes a nightmare, I would think, because you still have the same burn plan, still need volunteers. and the fire boss, they still have to travel to the same site. So not discouraging 1 or 2 acres. I'm just saying for logistics and for financial well-being and, you know, for budgeting, minimum 4 to 5 acres would be, yeah.
And what about a maximum before it becomes too overwhelming and too difficult to get the number of volunteers required?
That's a great question.
If I stumped you, it's just a thought, no worries.
I don't know if there is a maximum.
Okay.
If there's a maximum for tallgrass prairie, then that means we've overachieved what we wanted to do originally by creating large prairie projects. So
That's a great
that's a good
answer.
thing. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. And another question for me, and please, I encourage those of you who are still listening to add your questions into the Q&A or also the chat too. I can check there as well. But one of my questions comes into determining the timing for the burn. So of course, there's the weather considerations. There's lots of considerations that way, but there's also, of course, considerations of any mortality of species that are on the landscape. What goes into determining the best timing for you to do the burn, thinking about safety, but also other factors?
Yep. So historically, when we work with the MNR, their species at risk timeline was April the 15th. So we try to always burn prior to that. Obviously, the weather conditions in the last couple of years, it should be March 15th, you know, like looking at what we have outside right now, but it's always historically been April 15th. When we do our burns, we do a walkthrough as well. So we make sure that, you know, there could be amphibians, there could be reptiles, there could be birds. We do a walkthrough as well, but typically March, early April is, you know, the best time for what we try to accomplish for burn. You can still do winter burns as well, but to kill back invasive trees and maybe some cool season grasses that are growing a little earlier, burning in March and April seem to do very well. Graham?
Thank you very much. That's very helpful.
Yeah, I agree with you there, Jake. Timing's a big part of it. I'd mentioned we also have done some fall burns as well, and then it's kind of the same principle as in the spring. You kind of want to go out at the end, so after the main growing season's over and animals are less present. And then, yeah, so I mean, also a lot of native species in Ontario are accustomed or adapted or able to adapt with burns. So small mammals can easily outrun a fire. So the prescribed burns, when we do them, we hire professionals. They come out and they do a really good job. So it's not like we're just dumping some gasoline on a fire and burning up the whole thing. So they can light it with a back burn and have it snake and meander along at rates of like 2 meters per minute. So you can light a really slow fire, which will give small mammals a lot of time to easily outrun it. Birds can easily fly away. And then also, again, with the subsoil temperature really isn't affected too much from a fast, really hot fire. So even just burrowing a few centimeters under the ground as well, then can easily protect these animals.
Thank you very much. So that comes to the end of the questions that I have, but for those of you who are still on the call, I actually have a question for all of you. So in the top bar of the screen, you'll see a react button. It's like a little smiley face, and under there it gives you a few options. And I'm wondering for those of you who have done a burn, if maybe you could give a thumbs up. I'm curious to people who had experience. So I see a few up there. So there's a few people on the call who've had experience. And then also for those of you now, is there anyone who would consider doing a burn on the lands that they manage in the future now, considering all the different things that you learned about today? Okay, thumbs up. Oh, lots of thumbs up. Okay, that's good. So I'm glad to see that this gave you a lot of food for thought and helpful direction in moving forward. And I'll pass things on to Tracy.
Great. I was going to ask the same thing to put in the chat if you had some project that you were thinking about doing a prescribed burn on. So it can seem overwhelming, I think, to some people. And I was just going to mention that also power lines are something we've been thinking more about. And historically, we've always been told that you can't do a prescribed burn under a power line, but it sounds like there's doing some trials are being held. And speaking to Jason, he said there is a way to do it, but it's obviously way more complex and a lot of other preparations that you have to undertake to do that. So yeah, I want to thank Jake and Graham, our two fabulous speakers again today, for sharing with their expertise and their time and interesting projects and great photos. So I'm going to pull up our slide here. Can you see that?
No, I can't see it.
Oh, there we go.
There we go.
Okay, I just wanted to thank all the participants in the chat room and everyone who's joined us today. Hope you learned something from this. We'd love to hear from you. If you would like to email us, this is our best email. And we look forward to hearing more about all of your projects. Have a great afternoon.
Thanks, Victoria and Tracy.
Thanks, Jake.
Thanks, guys.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks, Graham. Bye, everybody.